My name's Rosie Goldsmith, and it's my pleasure to introduce you to the Goethe-Institut's latest pair of Doppelgänger. It's a great way to find out about the lives and work of Germans and Britons today. Each time we interview two people from the same profession in each country, someone in the UK who's worked in Germany and a German who's worked in the same job in Britain. Our Doppelgänger in this edition are journalists. Today I'm in Berlin to meet the British journalist Kate Connolly. Kate is the Berlin correspondent for The Guardian and Observer newspapers. She's been a foreign correspondent since 1996, including many years for the Daily Telegraph, covering stories from Basra to Belgrade and, of course, Berlin. Kate also writes about Germany for a wide range of other publications, from the Süddeutsche Zeitung in Munich to the LA Times. She was born in Newbury in Berkshire, studied German and English at Leeds University, freelanced in Vienna and Prague, before moving to Berlin in 2001. She's married to a German doctor and is currently on maternity leave after the birth of their second child, Samuel. Now, Kate, after living all this time in Germany, do you see it as your home? Is it your Heimat?
Heimat, that's a very complex
I thought I'd throw
German
that
word. Yes, yeah. I suppose that's a nice term, which is quite hard to translate into English, isn't it? It's certainly very much part of who I am. I do consider it very important to keep my British identity. I find that a very important part of who I am, obviously. But being in Germany has shaped much of my life. The fact that my two children now, the particularly 3-year-old, is speaking English and German. And it definitely, the literature I read, the newspapers, the way I lead my life, when I take out a mortgage, everything is somehow everything has to do with being in Germany. So it's very hard to detach myself from it.
From a media point of view, I mean, do you miss the British media?
You know, when I started out, that was quite hard. I remember when I first originally, you said I started out in 1996, which a long time ago now it seems, and I then came out armed with cassettes of Radio 4 programmes and videos and things like that. Now, of course, that is completely unnecessary because all of it's available online, and there's ways in which you can get British TV, and there's the iPlayer and what have you. So I'm quite well equipped.
What would you say are the main differences between German and British media?
I suppose as a working journalist, what I notice is the German journalists or newspapers are much less competitive, and that goes slightly against my instincts as a journalist, because you want to beat the competition. Whereas in Germany, you quite often will have a story that's in Die Welt one week, and then a couple of days later or a week later, it could be in another newspaper, and you think, hang on a sec, I've read that before, which of course doesn't really matter from the reader's point of view. But from the point of view of the people who are creating the newspaper, that is a complete anathema to, a British news editor.
When I cover stories in Germany or Britain as well, I do notice there is, for me, quite a big difference. There is more formality, for instance, on television and radio among German journalists, and there is a bit more deference as well, a little bit more of the Herr Professor, Doctor kind of deference.
You would not get a German journalist asking a politician the same question 9 times. That wouldn't happen. But where you also notice the deference, which I find quite hard, and certain German politicians realise that, and they try and modify their behaviour if they're going to have an interview with an Anglo-Saxon paper, is this whole idea of having an interview approved. So that is, you sit down, you have the interview, and then afterwards, you go through the whole painful process of having that approved by the ministry or whoever. So that gives the person that you've interviewed the chance to literally go through, let's say, metaphorically, with a red pen and cross out a lot of the things. What does tend to happen with quite high-ranking German politicians in particular is that you end up then having a lot of the meat taken out. So anything that might verge on being controversial could be misinterpreted. Humour often then ends up being removed, which is quite a shame, because I think that they would benefit often from that sense of another side of their character coming out, and sometimes that gets sacrificed, which is a shame.
Tell me about some of the main stories you've covered and the ones that the real highlights for you.
I suppose the biggest one would have to be the rise of Angela Merkel. The rise and rise and rise of Angela Merkel. And that's been fascinating to watch, obviously because of the fact that she's a woman. That's how I would first and foremost see it, and that she comes from East Germany. That has been fascinating to watch. And particularly because she's been plunged into the Euro crisis, and how that has not only shaped the way German politics is perceived, but also the way that Germany is perceived and the way that Germans are perceived. So that's been, I suppose, the rise of Merkel and then the Euro crisis have been the dominant stories. Are they the stories that people ask me about when I go back to Britain and at dinner party conversation and things like that, do you think? Not really. The ones that you get asked about are cannibals. So one of the big trials we ended up covering here as foreign correspondents was the German cannibal, and that got an awful lot of coverage. And then things like Knut the polar bear.
Well, I want to talk to you about Angela Merkel a little bit more. I mean, it is, as you say, the age of Merkel, or Mutti, as she's called in Germany. And you've actually met her quite a few times, I know, and you've interviewed her a couple of times. What would you say she's really like?
What comes across very well when you meet her is a warmth, and also from her point of view, I think not a sense that she knows everything better. She's very open. She lets you interrupt her. She doesn't. She doesn't come across as being arrogant. There's a warmth there. One time I thought she really reminded me of an old English teacher I had, who I'd been had a very warm relationship with. I think that she'd be a very good person to sit down and have a glass of wine with. She's knows her stuff. As she is, even though she always has advisors with her, she has the facts and figures at her fingertips and has a very, very good way of structuring her answers when you ask her a question. And yeah, it's definitely a sense of humour that comes out as well, quick-witted.
We tend to see Angela Merkel as a kind of iron chancellor, a very strong woman, sort of standing there in the middle of the Euro crisis, being totally in command. Do you think she is? And do you think she's handling the Euro crisis well?
I think what a lot of people, even within the German government, would say is that the message, the German government's message, is not communicated that well, I think. And I think that is quite interesting because the whole area of PR and how you present yourself is not necessarily something that comes naturally. This is a sweeping generalisation I'm making, but to Germans in general, I think it's something where Britain is maybe more advanced in the way that the PR machine works in Downing Street. It's a bit more.
There's spin.
There's a lot more spin. They're more sophisticated at it. They've been at it for longer, in a way, and the Germans are still, you feel like, sort of learning this from other people. But I definitely think that Merkel has not come out of it as well as she might have done.
How do the Germans now see our attitude in Britain to Europe?
I think they're quite confused about it, and I think they're also quite concerned. And even though they will express this in public, I do think it is what they think in private, Merkel in particular. And in recent conversations she has had publicly and privately, we're led to believe, with Cameron, it is, we definitely want you to stay on board, and it's good to have that balance. But I think what I've found also quite interesting here is that where you would think that, for example, the Conservatives in Britain and the Christian Democrats in Germany would have an awful lot of common ground. The one area where they cannot communicate on properly is Europe, and that's always amazed me, so that it means it makes it extremely difficult. So, I mean, I think that we are going to see Merkel giving, or whoever is in power, giving as much support to try and keep Britain in as possible.
Is it interesting covering German politics?
It is interesting. It can get quite muddy. It can get quite difficult sometimes to sell the German story to a news editor in the UK. That is always a challenge, but selling Germany in general has often been a challenge. It's not France, it's not somewhere where Britain's they aspire to be a bit like the French, you know, the way they dress, the way they eat. They have homes in France. Germany has not had that sort of appeal. So certainly one particular newspaper I've worked for, that made quite a difference, I think, in the way they viewed Germany. I think the Euro crisis in many ways has helped because it's meant there's been an awful lot of focus on Germany that wasn't there before, trying to understand the good things about Germany, about the way the apprenticeship system works, about their attitude, you know, the way the banking system works, and Germans' attitude towards spending and credit and things like that. And I think that's meant that there's been a lot more of focus on Germany. What's also helped, of course, is Berlin and the rise of Berlin, and the fact that I don't think it can be underestimated, the number of people coming first as backpackers and then as clubbers, and people then buying second homes in Berlin, and Britons I'm talking about, that has done an awful lot to boost the image of Germany and its cool factor in the UK.
You're, I know, an avid reader and you're a musician as well, and you cover the arts as well as politics for your various papers and magazines. How would you sum up the German approach to the arts? Yeah. By comparison, I suppose, with Britain.
But I think it was very interesting from the point of view that there is such a lot of money pumped into culture here, and it's recognised how much money culture also makes for the economy. You do get the feeling that the arts is something that is open to everybody, and everybody feels that they have a right to it and can enjoy it, and it's not just something that's reserved for the privileged.
I mean, politicians in Britain, if they said they went to the opera, of course, then they'd be pilloried, as you say, but they're allowed to go to football matches. That's okay.
They're allowed to go to football matches, but yes, I know. I know for sure that they have expressed the fact that if they are seen in the theatre, that would be extremely damaging for them. Whereas you have somebody like Angela Merkel, who puts her poshest frock on every year to go to Bayreuth, to the Wagner Festival in Bayreuth, and takes her husband with her, and that is one of the few times he's seen in public, and for that he's called the Phantom of the Opera, which, you know, I think the fact that she does that endears her to the Germans, whereas I think in Britain it would not do so.
Is there the same concern in German media that we discuss, as you know, a lot in the UK about transparency, press regulation, data protection, the Snowden files, WikiLeaks, that kind of thing?
I think the German public in general has been very concerned about what has emerged through the WikiLeaks and the Snowden file stories. I think in some ways it has confirmed suspicions that they had, this sense that the internet is sort of can be quite a dangerous place, and has also has caused German fears to emerge that were there in the past of being under surveillance, whether it be by the Stasi or the Gestapo. That sounds, often people say, oh, that's a ridiculous comparison to make, but I think that if you have had long periods of your history when you have been under surveillance, and often by your neighbours, and then it does make you feel very, very wary of that.
You've lived in Germany now a very long time, and you've had children here. You're married to a German. Do you feel you've really got under the skin of this country? Sometimes I do. Sometimes I feel still very much that sort of outsider, which I think is good to be if you're a journalist. And sometimes I wonder, do I court that? Do I want that? That's sometimes maybe a comfier position to be in, to be the outside observer. I think it goes in waves. It's a bit like the language. Some days you're speaking the language and you feel you're really, like sort of almost like a native, and other days you stumble over words and think, God, where's my German gone? So I think it's one of those things that it's a constant changing relationship as Germany changes, as well as its attitudes to certain things change. You think, gosh, this is a country I really like being in, or other times you think, gosh, there's some things that I'd really like to change. And what I do know is if I did go back to Britain, one thing I'd really miss is the bread. Say no more. German bread. Say no more. I'd travel miles in London to find German bread too. Kate Connolly, thank you very much indeed. Thank you.